procedures for leasing state land could use some clarification. These statutes are quite old. Sometimes some portion has been updated and others haven't. So we took a good look at these procedures, and after coordinating with the governor's office, coordinating with some of the lessees or former lessees that have been affected by some recent confusion. And after discussing significantly with OSLI, we kind of came up with Senate File 114, which attempts to clarify this process in both leasing vacant lands and as well as existing leases. So what we have here, and point out for everybody's benefit, we have some proposed amendments here that should be available to the public. Did everybody get those? Okay, well, hopefully we'll have some copies up here so we can have it all out in writing. We're still working these technical glitches, but for the benefit of everybody, we'll go ahead and explain clearly what the proposed amendments are. So,
Mr. Chairman, I'm
yes.
sorry to interrupt you. I just want to let you know you're live on YouTube right now.
Okay. All right, very good. Thank you. Okay, so we get into, in the bill on page 2, we start with subparagraph B, which deals with leasing vacant lands. And so when you get into this and talk about the preference of what happens when the lease is vacant, nobody has it currently. And so you have basically a laundry list of what you have to do to qualify for a preference. And so when you do that, we just read them off here. You have to be a bona fide resident of the state. You have to be authorized to transact business in the state, have actual necessary use for the land, who are owners, lessees, or lawful occupants of adjoining lands. That's currently struck in the bill, but that's part of the amendment, is to reinsert or make sure that language stays inserted, so that'll be a part of it. And you have to pay at least the annual rental not less than the fair market value. So as long as you can check those boxes, you qualify for a preference. What this bill does is it goes in and considers the circumstance if more than one entity qualifies for the preference. That's really the main point of this part of the bill, is what happens if you have 2 or more people qualify. In this case, we're saying we can go to a live auction. It's a little bit different. It's something that State Lands has done before, but it's different than just simply going with the highest bidder. The idea being that if they're both adjoining landowners, it's a little bit more, I guess you might even call it a tense situation if they're both going after the same vacant land and you want some resolution, more final resolution than whoever has the highest bid is the one that gets it. So obviously there's going to be hurt feelings there. There's going to be hurt feelings no matter what, but it's, I think the issue is the perception that whoever lost the bid didn't get a chance, really get a chance to give it their all, if that makes sense. Like you have in the procedures for land that's currently leased, they have an opportunity to match the bid. So that's all really we're trying to do there. And that's probably the main feature of the bill is just going ahead and having that live auction instead of just having the highest bidder automatically get it. Looking for more resolution, hopefully fewer legal fees for everybody involved as a result. Then once again, we go through paragraph 2, and it's just talking about providing adequate notice on the website, but also by mailing each of the adjoining landowners as described by rule. And we also go through and we define preference. We have a current definition in there that I think is less than ideal. I'm looking to basically swap that out with language on line 20 of the amendment. So basically a preference would instead be the superior right of an applicant qualifying under this section to have vacant land lease for grazing and other agricultural purposes issued by the board. So it's more directive when the concern with the current definition is that it's a little squishy, and the whole point of the bill is to make this process less squishy, if that makes sense. Then we also go ahead and define vacant land hopefully, just making it absolutely clear. That's just something that's not currently leased by the board. And then we get into paragraph H, and that's what's missing in the bill is a paragraph C that deals with a current lease. And so we're also making a very clear distinction that if you have a current lease, you have a preferred right. We're trying to make that consistent with subparagraph C. That's a preferred right if you have the existing lease, in this case, to match any bid that may have came in higher. For a vacant lease, it's a preference. So we're making sure that concept is clear and consistent. So then we move on to the next section, a few sections down in the Green Books, section 108, dealing with what happens if you offer the same annual rental for the same lands. And we're making it clear, and this is the way that OSLI does it now, that this is only for existing leases under that 36-5-105C. And so that's another proposed amendment to make it clear that it only applies to existing leases. And basically what this paragraph says here, if the old lessee basically bows out and there's additional 2 other leases and that has to choose between the 2, and everything else is the same, you go with the highest bid, or excuse me, the closest applicant in that case. So that's all that 108 is, a very long run-on sentence that says if everything else is the same, you go with the closest bidder. So you see, as it gets in this concept that earning the highest benefit to the beneficiaries isn't always the largest bid. It's the entity that's going to have consistent land use, got to make sure that land is good to go for the longest period of time. And that's the assumption, is that whoever's closest is going to be the one that takes care of it the best. So that's kind of the concept throughout the bill and throughout current statutes. Like I said, we're looking to provide clarity and especially vacant land procedures when everybody qualifies for the preference. What then? That's the question. And we're just recognizing the higher sensitivity when you have 2 adjoining landowners, 2 or more adjoining landowners bidding over the same piece of land right there on their fence line. And just going, we feel like the preferred better method would be to go ahead and do a live auction instead of just going with the highest bidder at the time. So these statutes are old. There's probably opportunity for further improvement, further clarity, but that's the start. Dealing with these situations where there's vacant leases and you get 2 individuals qualifying for a preference. So hopefully, as I sit up here, I know I had some good discussions out there in the audience before, and I think that's saying here provides some clarity as to what we're doing with the bill and having everything in front of me so I can look at it. That helps too. So hopefully that provides some clarity on the bill that attempts to clarify how we deal with vacant land leases. So that's all I got, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. So questions by the committee?
No, I think.
Okay, and I guess I have some.
Mhm.
So how's the live auction work? Do you actually have to go out and contract with the auctioneer, or do you just have the director stand up there and say, who will give me $5 for an acre? Who will give me 6? Or how you gonna do that? Or do we know?
Yeah, Mr. Vice Chairman, I think that's something that the board does currently. I think they've done it before. I can defer to them if I'm assuming they're on Zoom here. How they do that, I'm not sure. It's something I'm sure it could be accomplished by rule, or we could specify those specifics.
Okay. Okay, further comments by the committee? Okay, let's check and see who we have in the waiting room. Is there anyone who wants to testify in the waiting room at this time?
They might have to raise their hand there.
There we go.
There's the agency.
There you go, Mr. Chairman. There are several coming in.
Well, should we go ahead and maybe go ahead and start with your presentation?
Mr. Chairman, I'm Jennifer Scoggin. I'm the Director of the Office of State Lands and Investments, and with me today is Jason Crowder. He is the deputy. And if you would like, Mr. Chairman, we can certainly answer your initial question about the auction process and how we currently handle that at OSLI. With that, I would defer to Deputy Crowder.
Thank you. Deputy Crowder.
Sure. Thank you. It's a great question, and we do it in a variety of different ways. Typically, in a vacant land scenario, these auctions are done via sealed bid. However, the bill indicates that it would be a live auction. And in those cases, we have done it in a variety of ways as well. We've done it over the phone. We are exploring internet options, similar to eBay or some type of live Zoom type auction. We've also done them in person, where we've sat there and we've actually been the auctioneer. And please don't ask me to give you an example of that, but we have asked for bids just from staff internally. So we can do it in a variety of different ways, depending on the situation.
Okay, great. Further comments by people in the waiting room?
Mr. Chairman, if I might just sort of add on a few, if that's okay.
Okay, please.
OSLI is excited about the legislation from the standpoint that it looks to clarify the difference between a preference and a preferred right. And as Senator Boner mentioned, the preference has to deal with vacant grazing leasing situations when there's not an existing grazing or agricultural lease attached to the surface, whereas a preferred right has to do with situations in which there's a renewal of an existing grazing lease and it offers a preferred right to the existing holder of the lease. We have not seen any of the amendments. They have not been posted online that I'm aware of, Jason, and I looked for that as soon as Senator Boner mentioned those. So we cannot really comment on the new definition for preference, but we believe that tying 108 to existing leases, we think that's a great clarification, as well as inserting the proper term, which is preferred right instead of preference. I think that's why there was confusion about application, of those statutes to our current process. This is kind of a highly nuanced situation with vacant grazing leases and with renewal of existing grazing leases. So we would really like to see the proposed amendments, but with that, the additional notice provisions that are proposed in the legislation, we can certainly deal with those. We can absorb those in addition to our current notice practices under the rule. Deputy Crowder, I defer to you for any other comments at this time. We just feel a little bit in the dark with respect to the preference. And so we'd be happy to provide additional comment once we're able to review those, and we'd be happy to provide that to the committee. Thank you.
Okay, any questions by the committee for the director? Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I would like, excuse me, you mentioned that, boy, I wish I could talk. I hope it's not it shouldn't be my thing. What I'd like is, you mentioned the auction as being electronic or as live or even phone. Would you entertain the idea of changing that from a live auction to open up an amendment that would say the auction could be either live or electronic in form?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a great question. Whatever the committee would like, we're happy to abide by. Largely in this realm, and when we do this type of work, as the director mentioned, it's extremely nuanced based on where the parcel sits, how it's accessed via by a county road or a highway, or if it's completely landlocked by somebody's ownership. And so that largely tells us how and what process we should follow. And so we would appreciate some flexibility in that because a lot of those situations are different and how you handle them inures to the greatest benefit of the beneficiaries in a different way. So we feel the existing language allows us that flexibility to do whatever the situation dictates.
Okay, further comments by the committee, questions? Senator Costa.
We don't, well, you should have it. Page 2, line 17. It says applicants at a live auction. You're feeling that's flexible enough?
Mr. Chairman, I believe so. And I think that's because we interpret a live auction to be done in all the ways that I explained earlier, on internet or in person. But it's done with live bidding. It's not done with a hesitation or a pause between bids, like a sealed bid situation.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Senator French.
Your live auctions, are they, I've bought several ag related items on live auctions, and they're a timed auction. They may be 2 weeks, a lot of them are a month, a farm auction. They're dispensing of all their ag equipment. So that's what the live auctions I'm familiar with. And they'll have a time. The bidding starts such and such time on this day, and it goes through, maybe it's 2 to 3 weeks, and then you do the bids, let's say $100 for something, and then somebody say will bid 110, and you look at it, oh, geez, I can bid higher. I want that. I'll bid 120, and that process goes through until the end, and then it really ramps up the last half hour, because if you seriously want that item and it fits in your budget, you're really running up at that point. So is it similar to that, how you conduct your live auctions?
Mr. Chairman, some of it is, yes. The best example that we have is we currently offer all of our oil and gas leasing via an online platform with live bidding. And that goes on for 7 straight days, and it has over 200 parcels offered on it. And we've had, I'm losing the number, but I feel like 7,000 registered bidders on those live oil and gas auctions. So we could do it that way. We've not seen that kind of interest in grazing leases. Obviously, in this situation, we're talking about one lease with possibly 1 or 2 active bidders in play. So I don't know that we need to have that length of time, but if we go down an internet route, and depending on the situation, as I described earlier, whatever it dictates, we could set that timing to be 1 hour, 1 day, or 2 days, or really whatever it needs to be in that online platform.
Follow-up.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, whatever time frame you think is appropriate, but I know it's very effective. It is very effective at getting the highest bid. From my experience with them. Thank you.
Just a quick question. So we have 2 bidders on the same piece of ground. How often is that? How often do you anticipate that statewide? Is that an issue that comes up a lot, or is it a rarity?
Mr. Chairman, that's another great question. We did some review prior to the meeting, and currently we have 40 leases that are considered vacant, and leases can range anywhere from 5 acres to a few thousand acres. So there's a wide variety of types of leases that we have out there that are currently vacant. Each one of those situations are again, very specific, extremely nuanced. And when we offer these for bid, it's very rare that we get a considerable amount of interest involved. We have some exceptions, obviously, the large acreage parcels that we own. There's the Bull Creek Ranch that is south and west of the town of Buffalo. We received, I would want to say, close to 10 to a dozen bids on that property a couple of years ago. We just recently went and are continuing to go through a process in Crook County, east of Sundance on the Mosque property the board acquired in March of last year. And each one of those units had 4 to a dozen bidders on those. And so while it's difficult to say in each of those situations how the preference would have been applied or is being applied, or how many would approach the auction, we have noticed that when all of the bids are delivered to the office and we start working through our selection process, meaning the director's decision process where she issues her decision, when folks know that they're not in the running any longer and they actually see what the bids are, they start dropping out. And so when we offer, or if we intend to offer a live auction in this scenario, that further reduces the amount of people who are willing to stay in and play when they actually see who they're bidding against and the amount of money that those others are willing to bid before the live auction.
Further questions by the committee? I have one more. I just, for general knowledge. So we have let's just say we have a piece of what I would consider good rangeland in Wyoming, and it's public land, state land. What does a piece of good rangeland lease for per acre in comparison to privately owned land? Can you give me some examples of those situations, please?
Absolutely. And thanks for the question, Mr. Chairman. So state land is offered on a per AUM basis and not on a per acre basis. So it's difficult, even when you define it as good, to determine what that comparison would be, because we just don't run those numbers, frankly. However, we do use the private land lease rate on an AUM basis to help inform what the state AUM rate would be. And it's a formula that's given to us by guidelines through statute and then further refined through the board's rules. But basically it takes the 5-year weighted average of a private land lease on an AUM basis. It multiplies that by a parity ratio, another 5-year weighted average of the parity ratio, which is the cost to produce a good. And we use a bushel of corn in that scenario. And then we further multiply that or reduce it by 20% for the lessee's contribution to the lease. So we start at a market rate, we apply the parity ratio, which is a reduction, and typically that's around 40%. And then we apply another 20% reduction for the lessee's contributions. So I guess you could say in a very general sense, Mr. Chairman, that state leases on an AUM basis anyway are approximately 60% less than the private market.
Well, thank you for that honest answer. Yeah, that's how I've always remembered that situation, was that the state land actually leased cheaper than private land. But I think that's, if we have any more questions by the committee, Senator Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have a minimum bid on that, on the leases?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Costa, yes, we do. And it is that formula that I just laid out. We go through that on an annual basis, and that sets the floor.
Okay, further comments by anybody in the meeting room? Are there any comments, anybody in the audience?
I have to wait a little bit.
There's one.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Nicholson?
Nicolason, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I know everybody's had a long day. If I may, my brother and I run a cattle and sheep ranch in Converse and Natrona counties. And our family's been doing that for generations. We are the grazing lessees of a number of state and federal leases. And we personally have not had a lease conflict, but this is an important area for us personally. I am also an attorney and have been since 1997. My area of focus is real estate, and I had the opportunity recently to represent a client with a significant size ranch in Carbon County. And it was an interesting set of facts. And I think Mr. Crowder is exactly right. These are very often very fact specific and case by case. But I'll give you, if I may, give you and the committee a little bit of background, just to give you a flavor of how important this issue is to, I think, a lot of ranchers potentially across the state. In my client situation, they purchased a ranch roughly 10 years ago, and approximately 900 acres didn't come with the deeded land and the assigned grazing leases, both state and federal. But it was an interesting situation because the deeded and leased land that were conveyed surrounded these parcels, this approximately 900 acres. And there was under the current existing statute, there was a vacant state lease. My client got wind of it and submitted a bid. My client's bid was the minimum bid that was established as the fair market value bid by the Office of State Lands. My client didn't think a whole lot else about it because, again, he and his family own and lease all of the acreage surrounding these parcels. There were, I think, 3 isolated tracts. And so wasn't anticipating any competition. In any event, an individual with no land owned or leased in the vicinity, and in fact just owned, I think, 20 or 40 acres outside of Laramie, applied for, he didn't at the time have cattle and just had a few horses. He didn't have legal or practical access to portions of the vacant state land. The interesting issue was that the non-preference applicant had bid $11.18 more. There was no opportunity for my client, the preferred applicant, to meet or beat that non-preferred applicant's bid. And so the decision of the director in the Office of State Lands was to award it based upon the $11.18 difference to the non-preferred applicant. The case was appealed, and the board determined to sustain that decision. So my client is currently in limbo, and we don't know how that's going to turn out. But we do think, and I think everybody recognizes, that some clarification is necessary. We have language currently in this subsection B of 36.5105 that reads that the preference shall in all cases be given. We thought that language was fairly clear. The Office of State Lands advised us that that preference, it was their practice at least, that preference in subsection B is not applied unless there is a tie. That means that my client somehow would have had to have known to bid that $11.18 more for that shall in all cases application of the preference to then occur. So we think that this is a real issue that can be resolved by these legislative changes to these statutes. I'm going to stop there with respect to the background and address some of the specific language of the proposed amendments. And I think first, given my client's situation and what transpired, there needs to be an additional amendment. We believe that Section 105A should also be amended to make an explicit connection between the subsections. That is, subsection A states that it has shall inure to the greatest benefit to the state land trustees. Well, and the interpretation by the Office of State Lands was that essentially trumped all of the application of the preference. And so the preference that my client thought it was entitled to wasn't applied. So we would suggest that at the end of the subsection A, that there just be a simple clause added that reads something to the effect of, provided that the preferences in subsections B and C shall be utilized where applicable. That, I think, makes an important connection that then the entire statute, the entire 5105 can be read in part with the provisions consistently. I think that the next item is that we believe that the definition of preference in subsection B, and that is Romanet 3A, we think that's problematic in that it provides, I think, even more lack of clarity on what the Office of State Lands and what potential or proposed grazing lessees have and what they don't have. The definition is problematic for a few reasons. We think that it provides discretion where none is really appropriate. We think that it makes a situation where the interpretation is going to be squishy and we'll have to be back here again in the future to make additional tweaks to it. Therefore, my client and I are very supportive of the proposed new language that Senator Boner has read to us. I haven't seen it exactly. I wrote it down, I think, and I'm comfortable saying that, yes, that would do the trick in order to give that clarity that I think is needed. I'm about finished. I had just a couple other comments, and I appreciate you letting me go on as long as I have. I think that section 108, we should have a prefatory clause at the beginning of the sentence that says in existing lease matters, so that clarifies that that's the situation, that the tiebreaker, if you will, meaning the applicant holding title to lands nearest the lands applied for. That's what occurs in an existing lease situation. And we have this live bit that the committee's been talking about, and that the Office of State Lands was referring to in the situation of vacant leases. We think that it's crucial to have in section, and I'm jumping back to 105B, to allow the stricken language that reads who are the owners, lessees, or lawful occupants of adjoining lands to be put back in there. We think that's critical to how these different subsections are read. With that, I am going to stop. Again, I appreciate the opportunity and would stand for any questions the committee or you, Mr. Chairman, have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nicolason. Any questions by the committee? I guess I'm going to ask one real quick, and I think you probably know the answer. What does AUM stand for? Is that Animal Unit 1?
Correct.
Okay. Further questions by the committee? Thank you for appearing today, Mr. Nicolason. We will move on. Is there anybody else in the waiting room who would like to testify?
Mr. Chairman, I have two people in the waiting room, but they're not raising their hands.
Okay.
If they want to testify, I'd ask that they raise their hands.
Could the people in the waiting room raise their hand if they would like to speak, please? There's a little button down at the bottom you have to touch, I think.
one dropped off and the other person is not raising their hand.
Hey, you know what? I think we should do that in the legislature. You know, every time you don't want to talk, you just disappear. You get to go home. All right. Any questions by the committee? All right. Any testimony by members of the audience? Mr. Magagna, would you come forward, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim McGagnon with the Wyoming Stockbrokers Association. It's all right. I'll take this off so you can hear me more clearly. We had quite a discussion in the back, and I won't repeat that here this evening. Just a couple of quick points. And as I understood the amendments, and we'll look at them more carefully, but I believe I would view those as very favorable. I would also concur with many of the comments that Mr. Nicolason made, and think that those are deserving of some consideration. Back to the bill as it stands right now, I'm still struggling with, on page 2, section B says, those who are interested submit an offer to pay an annual rental that meets not less than fair market value. So if two applicants do that and they're both qualified equally under these various criteria that are established here, then we see no reason why the higher bidder of those two doesn't receive the lease. And so the language contained on lines 14 through 18 would only become applicable in that case if they had both bid the same amount. But if I'm the high bidder and I'm equally qualified with the other bidder under the way that the process has always worked and we believe should work, then there's no going to a live bidding. I'm the high bidder. I'm issued the lease. And that's something that we would like to see changed here. We cannot support this the way it is, but if subsection little I were changed to say if two or more applicants who fully qualify submit the same bid, then you would go to a live bidding process. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to take any questions if there are.
Thank you, Mr. Magagna. Questions? Chairman Boner, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the feedback there, but it just seems to me that, I know it's the cool new feature in the bill, but in order to go to that, you have to have two adjoining landowners. And so, and I understand, you have to submit that bid to make sure you qualify for the, make sure it's not less than fair market value. But what we found is that if it's two adjoining landowners, it seems to me to be very limited circumstances. So it's only apply for if neighbors are competing over the same piece of property, and that's it. It's just dealing with constituent issues. There's, like I said, there's greater resolution for everybody involved if you can just kind of get that out of the way at a live bid and not have to go through and create the animosity, frankly, that exists when you go through the legal appeal process, and especially when those bids are so close. And so that's just like to highlight that. And I hope that it's going to be in very limited circumstances. It's only if there's two or more entities that qualify, and once again, it's they have to be adjoining landowners. If we go ahead and strike that language, that's going to be removed in the bill if my amendment passes. So it's going to be very limited to these live auction circumstances, and meant to probably save those ranchers a lot of attorney fees. Hopefully, Mr. Nicolason isn't too offended by that. But I imagine, I'm assuming you're looking at that's going to increase costs for the lessee, but I imagine once you take into account the attorney's fees that generally go along with these situations, it's going to be a savings. So I guess the question is, if we were to remove or reinsert the stricken language on page 2, line 6 and 7, would that ease your concerns?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Magagna.
Senator Boner, the language on line 14 and 15 says two or more applicants who qualify in full, but owning adjacent land is not a qualification. That's only gives you a preference if one party owns adjacent land and the other one doesn't, both parties are qualified. It's just that one has a preference. As I read the language in B and the way it's always been interpreted, if you're qualified to do business in the state or legal entity, et cetera, and you have a necessary use for the land, that's a qualification. And you have to honor to pay market value, but the owners or the lessees gives you a preference. It isn't a qualification in order to bid. So if it were restricted as you've described it, Mr. Birch, Senator Boner, I would not have the problem with it, but I don't see that it's restricted to the cases where you have two landowners that are both adjacent.
Senator Boner?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I guess, boy, that's, I mean, it says right there on line 15 to be eligible for the preference. And I guess the assumption is if we also make sure that have those amendments suggested by Mr. Nicolasian under for paragraph A, that in fact this preference does matter, frankly.
Yes.
And so that's another part of the, I apologize, that's another amendment that I'd be suggesting, that we're going to elevate the importance of this preference. It is in fact a preference. It's in statute for a reason. We don't just get to ignore it whenever we, not to be too flippant, but we don't just get to ignore it. And then, so we're elevating the importance of the preference. And then within that, if you qualify, once again, we'd be reinserting the qualification that it has to be an adjoining landowner. Within that, then if check all those boxes, then we'd go to that live auction.
I understand that.
Okay, all right, so.
Senator Boner, the thing is that if neither of the applicants has adjacent land, they're still both qualified. You don't have to have adjacent land in order to lease vacant state land.
Mhm.
And this gives you a preference over the other person who doesn't have it. But in the case where neither of them have adjacent land, they're both qualified. So even if one bid significantly more than the other, under this language, you would be forcing them to go into a live bid process.
Mr. Chairman, that's not my intent at all. It's only if nobody has adjoining land, then we're not trying to affect that situation at
We'd be
all.
happy to work
So,
with you on addressing that situation. I just, in my view, this doesn't get you there with the language as it exists at this point, but
And once again, I just pointed to line 15, it says to be eligible for the preference, and that just limits the live auction to that. And obviously it's in subparagraph, it's under paragraph B as well, which deals with the preference. So if you have better language to make sure we get to the same spot, we're not talking past each other, I'm all ears.
okay,
And
thank you.
that's the whole point of the bill, is to make it less confusing. Hopefully we achieve that and not the opposite. So.
Very good.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Magagna? Well, Mr. Magagna, how many years have you and I known each other?
Well, we're both pretty young, so it can't have been too many. Mr. Chairman, if I might, before I leave, I do have to leave for a conference call I have to be on. I just want to let Chairman Boner know that we are very supportive of the next bill that's coming up, assuming you
Okay, super.
should work it after I leave.
Super. All right, thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any further comments by members of the audience? How come I know everybody here? Miss Herman, how are you?
Just fine. Committee Chairman, my name is Marguerite Herman, and I'm here as a member, a board member for a group called Advocates for School Trust Lands. And it's a membership group with members in states that still are lucky enough to have school trust lands, which is mostly in the West these days. And I'm just watching this, and actually I thought I understood the bill until the conversation in the back of the room. So I'm not going to opine on the wording of it. Again, I think we're all trying to get to the same place. Where does the preference become a factor, and who gets the lease? I do appreciate the bill that you define preference as opposed to preferred right, because they sometimes are used interchangeably, much to the confusion of everyone else. Also a definition of vacant land. And so I think those are good features of the bill. And as an advocate for the school trust, it's my priority, of course, is to get the most inure to the benefit of the beneficiaries, the school children. And so however you get to that point with fair treatment is is a good thing. And I appreciate your work on this because having watched the Board of Land Commissioners, you can see where confusion about wording has really kind of tied people in knots. So the extent to which you can straighten that out and give fair treatment and a top dollar for the school children. Good work. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Herman?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marguerite. Okay, further comments? Our state assessor.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Christy Racina, State Auditor, and I was debating whether to speak or not. I wanted to address, I think the good attorney from Natrona County brought up a really, really great example to demonstrate some of the challenges. Even though every single one is different, his example is really good. I just want to point out that I don't think the changes to the bill solve that issue. And I'm not saying it should or shouldn't. I'm just saying I don't believe it does. And my thought process is, in that situation, we had one applicant with a preference and one without. And the insertion of a live auction would not apply to that situation. I do like adding a definition of preference, and I'll look forward to reading the adjusted definition. It is a term of art. And I think and I only speak for myself from the Board of Land Commissioners, obviously, but preference is just that. It is preference, and it's where does it tip you over? It's hard to write a law that applies equitably to someone who may bid $1 less versus $1,000 less. And it's hard without that squishiness in there. Taking all the discretion away from the board would then result in a situation where anyone that qualifies for the preference would automatically bid the lowest. And there you go. And they win because they have the preference. So, Mr. Chairman, that's not a real cohesive thought pattern, but I just want to recognize that those situations are very, very challenging. And I think Senator Boner maybe said it best when he said something like, somebody is going to be upset at the end, no matter how you write the bill or how we interpret the law. So thank you, and subject to any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for our state auditor? And I have some. Senator Boner.
All right, that's what we're considering here on paragraph A of this section is, and that's kind of the catch-all. You're gonna let's see, be leased in such a manner and to such parties as to inure the greatest benefit to the state land trust beneficiaries. What we're saying is maybe adding on as provided by subsections B and C of this section. So making sure that there's I think that Mr. Nicolason probably explained the best that, it is in fact a preference. And while we want to give you flexibility, that preference also exists for a reason in statute. And we would just like to have a little bit more adherence to these statutes, and hopefully if we make it a little bit more readable, that'll make it better. And so I think that's an important concept that does address that situation. I think he said in Carbon County that a preference is in fact a preference, and the trust beneficiaries are protected because they do have to have a market value bid. So they can't get it for nothing, or they can't really lowball it. And once again, the assumption being, I think the concept throughout these statutes is if the individual is going to be closest to the land, it's one that's going to care for it the most. And that's important too. It's not just all about dollars and cents. It's about the longevity of this property, and that it's good, put to good use. So we're just kind of underscoring those priorities with this bill, and that's my intent at least.
Further comments?
Don't you agree? Yeah.
Further comments by the committee? And I guess I would echo that. I think that over the years, at least what I've seen with state lands is if you have a great lessee that takes great care of that land, I'm more than willing to have it at a lower price because we as a state many times have not taken care of that land. So we don't go out and fix the fence. We don't make sure that the well's working. The person that leases it does. And so that's why, to me at least, it should be a little bit cheaper. But my question for State Auditor Racinas is, how often have you had to, as a state board, make a decision on leases like this? Does it happen a lot or is it a rarity?
Mr. Chairman, great question. And we've had, and I've been on the board quite a short time, as you know, and I think we've had 3 that have been very contentious and very difficult and not as straightforward as any of these have seen. Now, from anecdotally from my colleagues, that is somewhat of a new phenomenon. It was new to them as well, even to my colleagues that have been on the board for a longer time. So that was over the course of 2 years. And Mr. Chairman, I would just comment that the preference thing does become difficult, and it's one of those things that it's hard to define, but we all know it when we see it, right? When it's $1 different, we know, but when that financial benefit overcomes a potential preference, I think we would all know that when we see it too, and maybe we draw the line in a slightly different spot. But that's, if it was an easy fix, I'd certainly give you some language that I thought was perfect. But yes, Mr. Chairman, it has happened, and not just with, I would comment, not just with grazing leases, all the time as well.
And a follow-up on that, so that puts the state board in a tough spot. They have to make a decision as to who the final winner is.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. I would counter that it's not any more difficult of a spot than the good legislatures put in every day. So, yeah, it's difficult, but like Senator Boner said, it's whenever there's 2 people that want the same land, someone is going to come out the loser.
Right. Understand that. Any questions by the committee? Well, thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
testimony. Are we ready to work this bill? Do I have a motion on the bill? Is there a second? It's been moved by Senator Cost and seconded by Senator French. This time, we have an amendment that is proposed. Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I'll move the bill that the committee, or the amendment that the committee has, and I'll just read out the amendment for the public. Once again, I apologize. I think we're still working on some technical glitches with this hybrid format, and these amendments have not been readily available for the public, but we'll work on that, and I'll do a better job of getting paper copies in this committee room, if nothing else. So the first one, and I'll just go ahead and read it. It'll be on, it's not in the bill right now, but we'd include that section A that's in 36-5-105. And so basically insert at the bottom as provided in subsections B and C of this section, which would in fact kind of tie in that catch-all beginning paragraph with sections B and C saying this is important. We can't just use that catch-all phrase in the greatest benefit to ignore the preference. And then on page 2, line 6 and 7, we'll reinsert the stricken language so that the adjoining land occupant does that would be a qualification for the preference. On page 2, lines 14, 15, delete in full. That's just a little cleanup thing. Either you qualify or you don't. It just makes it a little bit more succinct. And then page 3, line 6, basically delete the current definition of preference and insert the following. Preference means the board's ability, preference means the superior right of an applicant qualifying under this section to have a vacant land lease for grazing and other agricultural purposes issued by the board. So the problem with the current definition of preference is that it once again is quite squishy. It's saying this new language would say a preference is a preference. And then page 3, line 22. After applicants, insert under statute 36-5-105C. So this is getting into section 108 and making that clear, continuing the work that we have in the rest of the bill, making sure that section 108 only applies to current leases. It doesn't say that in the statute, but that's the board's current practice or the LSLI's current practice. So we're just making that absolutely clear, and that's consistent with deleting the word preference and inserting preferred right. Once again, making a clear distinction between the two. And then I think mostly dealing with a typo, page 4, line 5, where deleting is not exercised. So it actually reads in a competent manner. So that's the amendment, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. And it's been moved and seconded. Comments by the committee? Any amendments? Comment from the audience?
Sure.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, do we want to take any comments from the audience? Okay. Senator Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Should we, not necessarily for here, but the suggested amendment by the gentleman on Zoom, should we say if he can get that to us, we could consider it? Or what's your thought on that, Brian?
Senator Bonner?
I think that's income. It's not the exact same words, but I think he was talking about, yeah, that's that first part in paragraph A of tying it into subsections B and C, and also the new definition of preference.
Okay.
Senator French.
Along those lines, Senator Cost, Jim Magagna of Wyoming Stock Growers, on page 2, 14 through 18, he was questioning that and said, if I heard him correctly, might send an amendment to us or let us know a change, or is that something that was worked out? Because on the qualifying question, qualified applicants.
Yeah, it's something I could definitely talk to the stock growers and make sure that I understand what we're doing, and that with the language that I think we're working towards the same goal, but we need to make sure the words are right. And if they have suggestions as to make it better, I'm all ears. But I think that, if we make this amendment, it'll help us get further down the path. And if I have to bring committee the whole amendment based off of additional comment, I'll do that too. So.
Okay. Any further comments by the committee? Question being called. All those in favor of proposed amendment number 1 to Senate File 114, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. We are back on the bill. Final comments on the bill. Question being called. All those in favor of Senate File 114, please say aye. Oh, roll call. I'm sorry. I'm always jumping on getting my roll call.
Senator Bouchard, and Senator Bouchard left an absentee vote of aye. Senator French,
Aye.
Senator Cost,
Aye.
Senator Wasserberger,
Aye.
Chairman Boner,
Aye.
5 ayes. Do pass as amended.
Okay, the next bill for our consideration is Senate File 122, and the sponsor has to be our chairman, Senator Boner. Would you introduce the bill, please?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I'll just go ahead and go line by line through the 30-page bill here at 7 o'clock at night. But in all seriousness, so this bill would establish a Wyoming Agriculture Authority, similar to the Wyoming Energy Authority. Also, you can look to the Community Development Authority as a similar type of organization. I'd argue this would mimic more closely the Energy Authority than the Community Development Authority. This is in response to all the issues that we've had and have come to light during the course of the pandemic, but they've been building for a while, for at least, well, you can probably go back to Upton Sinclair and see some of these issues, but they've intensified over the past decade or so, especially as it deals with the meatpacking industry, with the increased consolidation of what has always been a little monopolistic type of business, but has gotten worse as we see large multinational corporations, many of whom are owned outright, one by the Chinese Communist Party, another one's heavily subsidized by a government in South America, buying up more and more space, if you will, in this critical link to get Wyoming's producers' product to the actual end consumer. And so there's reasons why, it is the way it is. It's very inexpensive. It's very cheap. But unfortunately, it's also very fragile, as we found out. And there's opportunities for anti-competitive behavior, and we'll have lots of those discussions. And it's absolutely vital that with our third largest industry, that we have an ability, a resilient means of getting our product to market. It's also important for the consumer who has to eat, right? Or at least that comes in handy. So this is another tool in the toolbox to get more small to mid-sized meat processing capacity out in the state, but it's not limited to that. It could be anything. It could be dealing with sugar beets next. The next issue might be with sugar beets or wool or wheat. We just don't know. It's meant to address any and all potential ag issues the same way the Energy Authority is. So that's kind of the idea behind the bill. Obviously, two main objectives here. One, that opportunity to provide a low interest loan to increase processing capacity, that value added for agriculture, but also it represents an opportunity to reorganize some state agencies or functions of state agencies to have this be really the folks who advocate for agriculture. The Department of Agriculture does a very good job right now, kind of wearing two hats. They're primarily a regulatory agency, as we all know. That's a very important function. It's obviously something that's going to continue, but we kind of expect them to switch it up sometimes and then do things that are fun, like the state fair, or things that support agriculture, such as weed and pest, prairie board, those sorts of things. In addition to the obvious things that would functions that would fit under the Ag Authority, like the Beef Council, the Wheat Marketing Commission, and so on. So that's the idea behind the bill. Once again, it's focused on the template was that Energy Authority, but there's some differences here. First of all, we start into the bill with the definitions, talk about agricultural processing. That's an important concept. It's not just meat processing. It can be just about anything. So it includes meat processing, crop processing, or other agricultural products processing. So it could be wool, it could be barley for your favorite adult beverage. It's really meant to be very broad and give the board and the authority broad discretion. So going through this as quickly as I can, I guess, pretty basic definitions here. And once again, another important one is producer. So anybody who produces ag commodities or who will process, sell, or distribute these Wyoming products. So both the meat processors and the producers, that's what qualifies as a producer. So important concept on page 4, that's actually not going to take effect until July 1st, 2022. And 7 members of the board. The idea being that it's going to take some time to get this spun up. And if this bill passes, I imagine it's going to constitute a significant amount of work over the interim to get this right and get the board in place and to have that discussion as to what functions are best suited for the Ag Authority as it relates to other agencies. So the one thing that we do have to get absolutely right is the board. That's going to be appointed immediately. I imagine we're going to be interacting with them as we build this authority up from the ground. And so a 7-person board is what we have right now, a majority of which have to be qualified voters of the state of Wyoming. And they have to be engaged chiefly in agricultural industry. You see an important definition on page 5, line 18. Ag industry means basically relating to the science, art, business, and finance of cultivating soil, producing crops, and raising livestock. But also the financing part. So if you're an ag lender, it's going to be a very important part of this authority. We want to make sure we include the ag lending industry as well. And so you'll have 2 representatives in beef production, 1 in sheep production, 2 in crop production, and 1 in agribusiness finance. That leaves 1 more sort of at-large seat that can be appointed at the discretion of the governor. And then we have the ex officio members, governor designee, director of the Department of Ag, dean of the College of Agriculture at UW, Wyoming Business Council. And so obviously we see those as the agencies that are primarily going to be interacting with this authority. Just going into what the authority can do. They can request assistance and work with other state agencies. They're subject to all of our public records laws, pre-boilerplate stuff here. And once again, a lot of this framework is adopted from the Energy Authority. So if I skip over any paragraph, it's because it's a kind of boilerplate language. It's worked well so far, and don't really see any issues with it. So then we get into the purposes of the authority, and this is kind of their marching orders. So they're supposed to diversify and expand the Wyoming economy and agriculture industry, coordinate strategies with the Department of Ag to improve processing and capacity. Obviously, it's important the Department of Ag is one regulating these facilities, so it's important that they be in the loop. Help out with getting federal funds if they exist, and leveraging all the federal activity or the loans or programs that might exist for this sort of activity, and helping out with the paperwork, which is huge for these processing entities. That getting a USDA certification is a massive process. And if there was an opportunity to assist anybody who might be interested with obtaining, especially that USDA certification, it'd be nice to have that expertise, that experience in one place where we can help folks remove those barriers that are part of the problem, the red tape that prevents real competition and aids the monopolies we're so concerned about. Once again, so that's the general direction. The specific powers of the authority, once again, this is kind of boilerplate language. Pretty important concept on Romanet 4 on page 10. Could provide loans, grants to assist producers to upgrade or dispose of agricultural processing facilities, and to make sure that facilitate the processing of ag products in the state of Wyoming. And so it's important. That's an important concept because it's limited to the actual facilities have to be in Wyoming, but the distribution and delivery of those products are not limited, obviously, to the state. So we can export, help out with that. I did have a nice paper copy that was highlighted that's at my desk in the chamber. So, and it's also on paragraph 10, important element to highlight on page 11, engage with potential marketing opportunities. That's why that partnership with, say, the Business Council is so important, to work those potential marketing opportunities. That's already, that a lot of good work's already been done there. Okay, so getting on to paragraph B on page 13. Once again, another concept is very important one is that they make sure they're complying with all federal and state regulations. And once again, the important concept here is like the Energy Authority, there's an opportunity to leverage municipal bonds and municipal bond rates and as a revenue bond to go ahead and provide loans if the private sector is not doing the work. That's a very important concept as well. So paragraph D, it says the authority shall not exercise any of the rights or powers if private persons, firms, or corporations are performing the acts. And we get more into more detail on paragraph E, exactly how that works. So if, say, there's a desire to finance a meat processing plant, for example, the authority is going to have to advertise that in both a statewide publication, one in the local area where the project is proposed to take place, and then anybody could have 90 days to respond saying, actually, we're going to go ahead and do that in the private sector. That's something that's actually worked well in the past with the pipeline authority. There's a clear market opportunity that's important in the case of a pipeline, for example, to get that product to market. Nobody's really doing it, but if the pipeline authority had been successful in getting the ball rolling, then all of a sudden somebody steps up and says, oh, actually, we're going to do it. So that paragraph D is actually really important. So they have 90 days to respond. And then basically there's a 180-day follow-up period where they actually have to start making progress and doing, making work on the project. So going on to page 15, once again, like I said, it's really important, these loans, we have a cap at $50 million per project. The idea being that we don't want to necessarily have a large processing plant and contribute to the problem. But then again, that should be enough for a medium-sized facility, a meat processing facility. I think, and like I said, there's no magic number about that $50 million, but that's a good cap to account for inflation. And hopefully they don't actually go all the way up to the cap on a particular project, but it's good to limit them in that regard. Another important concept on page 16, the interest rate for the loan, it has to be at least 1%. That is a difference from the Energy Authority. I believe that was 2%. We lowered it just because interest rates are so low right now. Once again, this is a minimum. It's not necessarily saying it has to be 1%. In fact, I anticipated it absolutely would not be 1%. But when you have a 10-year, Treasury note going for less than 1%, it's at least at the time that this was drafted. We'll see if it changes before we vote on it. But we just thought we'd make that a little bit lower, trusting the board's discretion. Obviously, they can make it whatever they want, but it has to be at least 1%. So those are some important concepts that, some of these things are going to be confidential. And so we have a good confidentiality clause there at the end of that article and on page 17. Then we have some legislative findings. Not sure if we need these on section 2, but they're there in case anybody really feels strongly one way or the other. But once again, now we get into this very important concept on page 19, talking about the revenue bonds. And so that's very important. We have another cap in terms of the number, that total amount of revenue bonds that the authority can participate in. It's $250 million. I want to say the Energy Authority is something like $3 billion. They've never even come close to that. I think testimony we heard that they had one loan once for $30 or $40 million. So that's a cap. Like I said, nothing magic about that, but that's that's be enough for several large, or excuse me, medium-sized processing plants. Certainly would love any input if anybody has that there, but certainly don't anticipate them getting anywhere close to that ceiling. And once again, this is all more technical, I guess, discussing about the terms and limits of the bonds, nothing groundbreaking there. Once again, this has worked very well for the Energy Authority and nothing's really changed with this bill draft. And once again, this is just standard kind of revenue bond language. Okay, and that's, like I said, there's a lot of just, standard boilerplate language, dealing with the authority and how the bonds work throughout the rest of the bill. Going on to page 29, it says that the newly appointed board, they be appointed by July 1st of this year. And say they have to meet at least twice. And then take all actions they need to implement the powers of the authority, which means consulting with this committee over the interim. $10,000 general fund appropriation. I might just ask for that to be double, just so we're sure, just in case they want more than 2 meetings. But that's and we got that $10,000 from what the Energy Authority board uses, but obviously we anticipate a little bit more work from this board as it gets spun up. So we're probably gonna have to increase that. Once again, this is effective July 1st of this year, with that actual authority being taking effect July 1st of 2022. So it's my intent to once again, we're gonna have a significant discussion over the interim as to what function of state government we're going to move under this authority, and that would help with provide employees, provide for I'm imagining about 3 or 4 employees to work at this authority. It would help. And another important concept is, as in this interim period, the Department of Agriculture will provide them with straight support for the board. So there is a fiscal note talking about once it does get up and running, it's about a $2.2 million amount. But once again, the intent here is to have that discussion over the interim about what functions of state government we're going to move under this authority, and hopefully have this be, if not revenue neutral or expenditure neutral, I guess I should say, but have that discussion. And so that's my intent. I don't really see it as necessarily adding a state agency, especially if we have opportunity to look at how we organize all the functions spread throughout at least 3 different departments right now that support agriculture. There might actually be an opportunity for consolidation, frankly. So that gets us rolling with the Ag Authority. Certainly it'd be a heavy lift, but I think one that's necessary to support our 3rd largest industry, especially as they face more and more competition and challenges from foreign governments, from large multinational corporations. I think it's about time that we did something to recognize the space that we're competing in and make our business more competitive. So, Mr. Vice Chairman, that's 30 pages in a nutshell.
I just want to compliment you, Chairman Boner, for such a small bill at such a late hour.
I think somebody's community college bill had the problem with the late hour. That's
Yeah, that got the temperature up. Okay, I like this bill. Questions by the committee? Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. On page 28, permissible investments, you're saying that, I don't know that we'd ever get to that. Do you? The 1 billion. I was looking at that and it's like, wow. Where do we get it?
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. So that's a different area statute. And all that we're doing is we're exempting the Ag Authority from it. That's dealing with the state treasurer. Yeah, so we're just saying that we're not having an effect on that $1 billion cap. It's a separate issue. And the other references are things like I believe WCDA and the Energy Authority. So.
Okay. Senator French.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to grill Senator Boner on this one. On page 29.
Senator French,
Yeah,
may I remind
mentioned
you, he's your first committee chairman. You're very first, so use your language, pick your words carefully.
Grill away.
I would like to respectfully ask a couple questions of the good chairman. that better?
But you're knocking it out of the park.
On page 29, it says, it mentions there's appropriated $10,000 from the general fund for administrative expenses for the authority in implementing this act. Back on page 9, when it says powers of the authority may, on line 15, excuse me, employ officers, agents, and employees as it deems necessary. Do we know what kind of cost that is, Mr. Chairman?
Senator Boner.
Thank you, Ms. Fresher. Not exactly. That's the fiscal note in the back was based off of the Energy Authority. So I imagine it'd be around that ballpark. But obviously, that's something that's going to require additional legislative action. Right now, all that in terms of personnel, all that this bill authorizes is the board to get together. And it's my intention to have the discussion of the interim as to how to provide that administrative support, keeping in mind the state's fiscal challenges. But once again, I think we have at least 3, maybe 4 agencies that support agriculture. Maybe that's frankly unnecessary. So it's my intent to have this be get that $2.2 million from current functions and kind of sweep it under the Ag Authority and use that to support the agency or the authority, excuse me. Yeah.
Senator French.
Mr. Chair, another question on page 10, line 5, provide loans and grants. I think Chairman Boner said the loans would be in the 1% range, possibly. I guess my question is, what kind of percentage on the loans, and that's could be unknown, but what kind of percentage on the grants? If somebody comes with a project and it's a $10 million project, let's say, is the authority going to say, we'll grant you 10%, like 1 million, and then you need to take a loan for the other 90%? What kind of, so that the general public out there or maybe other producers don't, maybe they're smaller and they're like, they granted that business $5 million. They just gave them $5 million for their benefit, to run there. So I was just curious what kind of breakdown that might be.
Senator Boner.
Yeah, so I think right here on the paragraph 4, it's just kind of it allows for the possibility of, say, a grant. I think the greatest focus would be on these revenue bonds that the loans generate from revenue bonds. And so those are separate concepts when you talk about the minimum 1% rate. It's just that it's a minimum. I'd imagine, you'd have a sweet spot in there that's below the market rate, but it's above hopefully the 1%. So it'll be somewhere in between the municipal bond rate and the market rate is where we're trying to make a difference there, if that makes sense. So the 1% is just a minimum. It doesn't mean that it's going to be anywhere close to 1%. It's going to depend on market conditions, which of course are going to fluctuate significantly from year to year, decade to decade. So it's hard to say with any certainty. And that's why the bill is written the way that it is. It gives the authority the discretion to set that rate. Practically, it'd be somewhere between the municipal bond rate and the overall market rate. So similar to, like I say, the WCDA program, where you get a home loan for first-time home buyers at lower than the market rate. So that's the intent there. And it's, we're not going to get in the statutes. We're not going to get into the details of, what it could be used for, what it's not. The idea is to give the authority, broad authority, I guess, within these parameters. And so the grants, I don't see the grants being a huge part of it. We have it in the bill just because you want to allow for the possibility, I suppose, but there would have to be an appropriation from the legislature for those grants. Either that or they have to find some other federal program which enacted as the go-between. So it's just allowing for the possibility of a grant. I think we'll still have the business council to do those sorts of things. I think the greater focus here is again, beyond the revenue bonds. And so, yeah.
If I may, one last
French.
follow-up.
Senator French.
Mr. Chairman, on line or page 13, line 5, under C, the authority may borrow funds. Who are they going to borrow from?
Well, you'd have
Senator
to,
Boner.
I don't know the process of getting a municipal bond, honestly.
But it'd be strictly in the bond.
Right,
bonds
that's
that
the
they
whole
would do
goal
that.
is I mean, you give out, they would give out, the bond at the municipal rate. I don't know who buys that. I think it just goes out to the market. I don't know exactly how it works. But then, the revenue is called a revenue bond because the revenue from the project will help pay the bond there. And so, it's one of the areas that we probably glossed over. And I forgive me, I don't know exactly where, but it says, that the actual facility is part of the collateral. So if something goes wrong, we still pay off the bond and all that. Forgive me, I don't have, it's in
no,
one
I
of those
guess I would-
paragraphs. So, but
Yeah.
so the idea is you leverage that municipal bond rate to allow for a lower loan to get, and in a business like me packing with tight margins, so hopefully that'll make a difference. So.
Okay, I guess in my head, I was thinking they might borrow from the general fund $200 million or something, so it's not going down that street.
No,
Okay.
no, not
Okay.
unless we approve it, but
Okay,
no.
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, at this time, further comments by the committee? Is there anybody in the waiting room that would like to speak to Senate File 122? We have some people. Doug Miyamoto, Director Miyamoto, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We just thought, we don't have specific testimony necessarily, but we did want to be available to the committee for questions. I think our role is pretty much relegated to helping stand up the Ag Authority, at least in the initial part, from July 1 of 2021 until June 30th of 2022. It would be the Department of Ag's responsibility to help get everything set for this board in order to operate. And I do have some reservations about our ability to implement that effectively, just based on the expertise that we have in-house now. We've never done anything similar to bonding authority and setting up an agency or an authority, I guess a board that's capable of doing that. We're not sure what all that would entail, but we would probably need to contract with or hire some expertise to implement the act until the authority is established. And then another thing that we noticed about the bill can be found on page 29, starting with section 4 there on line 12. It says that there's appropriated $10,000 from the general fund to the Ag Authority for administrative expense incurred by that same authority. And that appropriation shall be for the period beginning with the effective date of the act and ending on June 30th, 2022. It was brought to our attention by our Attorney General's office representative that since the $10,000 is appropriated to the Ag Authority and they're not technically created until the day after this funding expires, that funding wouldn't be available to the Department of Ag to have any of the people that are named to the board meet or other purposes that they may deem necessary. So that's another issue that we just wanted to bring to the attention of the committee. And outside of that, Mr. Chairman, it's be happy to try to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, any questions by the committee? Senator Boner.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Wasser. I appreciate that's a good catch. We'll probably make that amendment. Yeah, it doesn't, don't need you to give you the obligation to provide administrative support, then give you $10,000 to a different entity that isn't you. So we'll we could probably go and make that amendment. And just to make sure the intent is clear on section 3, I'm just thinking about, the purely administrative support, making sure that the board members get paid if they need, somebody to potentially take take minutes of their meetings. That's about all that I'm envisioning. So if there needs to be additional clarification in that, in those areas of the bill, Director, if you have a suggestion, we'd be happy to hear it. So.
Questions for the director? Senator Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Do you see some of these meetings as possibly being Zoom format? Maybe it would save some funding a little bit there. What's your thought on that, Mr. Miyamoto?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, that would be a question that I would probably leave to the discretion of the named Ag Authority board members. Preference on how they would prefer to do their meetings, and we would be there in an advisory capacity and just kind of handling the infrastructure part of the board meetings. I would run it probably similar to the way we did with the establishment of the new state fair board when that happened. We were trying to help them get themselves established, but most of the decisions about how they were going to function and the frequency and timing of their meetings were questions that I just asked to the newly appointed board members and let them take the lead on their timing.
Okay, further questions by the committee? Nope. I guess I have one for Senator Boner. I'm looking at the makeup of your board. And I guess, at least my years in agriculture, I always thought that a person with expertise in marketing agriculture would benefit us greatly. And I was just wondering, what were some of the reasons for the choosing the board members you have, and did you have the opportunity to think about maybe an agricultural marketing consultant?
Well, yeah, it's my overall objective was to get a good representation of the ag producers with the additional element of the ag finance. That was about it. That is the extent of my thought process. So yeah, there's and part of the reason why we had that at large members, because there's things that we're not going to think of, I'm sure, and so that could be one of them. There's an opportunity to specify what that last board member is going to be, and that's like I said, this is the part that we have to get right off the bat. So yeah, I'm open to any suggestions as to who or what other type of profession within the ag industry would be a good fit on board.
Okay, any questions? Anybody else in the waiting room? I don't.
Mr. Chairman, there is a gentleman in the waiting room. I'm not sure if he wants to speak.
Okay, at this time, if there's a person in the waiting room, raise your hand and we recognize you and you can speak on Senate File 122.
Okay, here he comes.
Mr. Chairman, Keith Kennedy with Wyoming Wheat Growers. Am I coming through loud and clear?
Coming through great, thank you. Thanks for coming.
I actually thought I would miss your meeting after the Senate adjourned this evening. That's why I'm not there in person. And Mr. Chairman, a follow-up to your question there, and one of our thoughts, given some of the viability studies that we've looked at, another person in finance would probably, in our opinion, be the most valuable on this authority board. We see that there's just one, but given the focus of the authority, more than one person with a financial evaluation background would probably be most valuable here. And with that, we would certainly welcome this. We've looked at several projects that could benefit wheat producers, and we'd be encouraged to help the authority later on. And with that, I'd welcome your questions.
Okay, questions by the committee? No questions at this time. Thank you. Thank you, Keith. Further comments, Keith? Oh, he left. All right. So,
None, thank you.
all right. So let's go to our audience. Mr. Moline.
Mr. Vice Chairman Committee, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this bill. I think this, as a good chairman pointed out, this is a function of government, is to help the industries in the state. I think there's ample opportunity, not only in the livestock industry, but I'm thinking of a crop that we're just recently starting to grow, hemp, not the smokable hemp. But I mean, they're to help out some of these newer industries, to help them get established and to grow, to help diversify not only the ag economy, but the overall Wyoming economy of adding in the processing. I think that's very important. One item that I wanted to ask you folks, I personally am waffling on it back and forth. There's pluses and minuses. Right now, the way I read the bill, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's focused on in Wyoming processing facilities. I understand that. I think that's a great focus. I'm wondering if we want to not rule out of state processing facilities. I'm thinking of the lamb co-op we had. It was very successful for several years. It did a lot to help Ms. Hendrickson's industry she represents, but that facility was located out of state, but it was a tremendous benefit to Wyoming producers. And I'm thinking of some other, the smaller crops, I'll bring up hemp again. If there's a way to do some regional processing to, the focus would be to help Wyoming, but to maybe on a economies of scale to work with some other states to build something that would benefit both states, and I understand the primary focus is Wyoming. As I said, committee, that's one I waffle on back and forth. I know the very highest priority should be something that is totally encapsulated in Wyoming. But the way I read this would rule out looking at anything that would be out of state. I could lobby both positions on that one, but that's just something to a question I raised. But in response to Vice Chairman Wasserberger's comment about having marketing is probably the weakest point of many of the agricultural producers. But I do want to point out that within the bill, you are able to hire consultants, utilize other expertise that exists. Perhaps the University of Wyoming, perhaps, there's marketing firms in Wyoming in the region. So they wouldn't necessarily have to be on the board, but the board could utilize the expertise of consultants. Again, sitting firmly in favor of this bill. I see this fits with my members' policy, hence the reason I'm taking this position. Could be a beautiful thing for the state of Wyoming. I would love to see it go forward. And with that, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, committee, I'll sit for any questions. Whoever, if you
Questions
have
by the
any.
committee, Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. First of all, I'm passionate about Wyoming. And so I would love to see products if industry can be brought in that's going to be able to create the industry here. I would be very cautious about going out of state. I mean, how can we get the industry here? It'd be my concern. Even if we could get the lamb processing and all here, it'd be great. I don't know. Maybe it's out of reach and maybe we need to consider it, but it'd have to be down my list of little ways.
Well, if I may, Mr. Vice Chairman, one comment I'd have on that is going to depend a lot on the commodity. Many of our commodities are very storable. One of the downfalls of the animals, they're not storable. When they're ready to go, they're ready to go. And hence the reason that a regional aspect of the lamb co-op is that we could utilize animals from other parts of the state. One of the important things is to keep that supply chain going. And one of the things many, many, many years ago, we tried a product called Wyoming Lean. It wasn't the meat I would like to eat, but it was very acceptable to some of the areas where they marketed it. One of the downfalls was to meet that criteria of that product, Wyoming itself could not supply enough numbers to have it on the shelf 365 every day. If a consumer is going to want to buy something, they want it when they go to the store. And that's, it's going to be very commodity dependent, but if we can do something regional, a niche marketing or something, but in order to keep the supply to the plant, we may be beneficial to go to a regional, other storable commodities, our grains, to a lesser extent, hay. You know, there's some opportunities to do some marketing, some processing of hay to make it a little bit more marketable. That's why I don't want to, I completely agree. The focus needs to be in Wyoming for Wyoming. I don't want to rule out that we may be able to have a great marketing production opportunity utilizing Wyoming products, but at an out-of-state facility. So that was my point on that. There's pluses and minuses both ways, sir.
Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I'd say that was a consideration I had in drafting the bill. It may have been in the bill at some point, but I think that it's prudent to kind of crawl before you walk and maybe get started. You know, and I think the restriction is only for the actual physical processing facilities. There's nothing preventing commodities from out of state being processed there, and certainly nothing preventing us from distributing outside those facilities. But that's a restriction for now. I agree with what you're saying. Maybe we can have that discussion later on, but for now, I think it's best just kind of focus on what we have in front of us, and so that's why it's a little bit more limited. And so I appreciate the thought. It's one I had too, but for now, the reason why it is because I believe it's prudent to just kind of start at home and see where it goes from there.
Mr. Vice Chairman, if I may respond, I wholeheartedly agree. Too many times we set too grandiose of plans and we can't do them. If no producer is going to put in 1,000 acres of a crop that he's not familiar with. So building that familiarity, we would always have the opportunity to expand if the supply is there. So no disagreement on my part, sir.
Okay, questions by the Senator French.
Yeah, Mr. Vice Chair. Just a comment. I agree with Senator Cost and Senator Boner that, you know, it's our primary focus for Wyoming's mineral industry and mining, and a lot of things are under attack. It's an opportunity for people to maybe do that plant. Maybe it's a small plant, just help with expertise, financing, grants, whatever, all of that's mentioned in the bill. Might be a small plant that maybe just say in a meat processing slaughters 10 head a week, you know, to a Montfort of the world, that's nothing, you know, or maybe it's 50 a week or 100 a week, or a small grain processing. I know Mr. Koss understands this. We had a young man start a gluten-free thing in Powell, the town of Powell, which was a small business, but a very good business for the local farmers, you know. So our focus is, and I I appreciate your comments, but our focus is Wyoming and just trying to enable somebody to bring in or develop a small plant, a medium, large, whatever it is, which will employ Wyoming citizens. It'll give another marketplace, maybe a better market, higher price for that Wyoming beef, for those lambs or those crops. So that's just my comment.
Okay, thank you. Senator Cost.
I'll make it very quickly too. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. The other idea for me would be, okay, instead of us having to go to a regional area, the regional area could be here and they can come to us. So we could bring others' production into here to make it, because you're right, we're limited on the amount we can get. And so could we get others to come in to help supply that at the same time? So they would bring them in here for processing as well.
Mr. Vice Chairman, I wholeheartedly agree with your folks' comments. I don't want to rule anything out at this point, but I wholeheartedly agree. We need to focus on Wyoming. One additional comment. Right now, buying local is huge. I wholeheartedly hope we can capitalize on it. Talking with some of the meat processors and other things, people want to know where their food's coming from. Not just meat, but other products as well. If we can capitalize on that, that is a win-win, not only for the industry that I represent, but also for the Wyoming consumer, the Wyoming taxpayer, for everybody. It's win-win, and that's why I sit in support of this bill. And with that, Mr. Chairman, if there's no questions, I'll shut up and get out of your way.
You're a good man, Mr. Moline. There's only one person in the room that hasn't talked, so she might as well come up.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I will have to make a final comment. She let me go first. I offered. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I really appreciate this bill, and I look forward to supporting it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moline.
I always love to be last here. Amy Hendrickson with the Wyoming Wool Growers Association. And my only comment about the conversation that we've just had is that I would like the wool growers to be a part of that discussion when it comes time to it, because we learned a lot about the Mountain States Frozen plant and the importance of what that plant did for our industry in Wyoming. And with the technology that there is out there now to be able to identify Wyoming animals, Wyoming grown animals, I do believe that there is a place that that Wyoming can support that, even if the actual processing isn't in the state. But that's a complicated and nuanced issue, and really deserves an extended conversation. Again, one thing I should probably say, we are titled the Wyoming Wool Growers Association, but we represent all aspects of the sheep industry in Wyoming, both lamb and wool, and even some goats and some dairies. I don't know if they're still there, but we've had inquiries about a sheep dairy and out of Sheridan County. But we do support this. We believe very strongly that Wyoming has some of the best agriculture products in the country. Certainly from Wyoming, we produce the finest wool in the country. We don't produce the most of it, but we produce very good wool and very good lamb. And I think that the idea of the state supporting the infrastructure to ensure that our ability to continue to provide that both to our state and to the country and to the world as a food and fiber is just really good. And I commend the chairman for bringing this forward. I think it's a great bill.
Okay, questions by the committee? Ms. Hendrickson, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Questions by the committee? You ready to work the bill? We have a motion on the bill? Senator Costa has moved Senate File 122. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator French. Okay, we have a proposed amendment. Senator Boner.
Mr. Vice Chair, I think I'll just, if this is amendment, I'll be as committee of the whole. That's
Okay. Do we have an amendment for the last paragraph with the,
Senator Wasberg, on page 29, line 14, I moved we strike Agriculture Authority and insert Department of Agriculture.
is there a second? Discussion. Question. All those in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Is there any further amendments? Ready for the bill? Question on the bill, I'm sorry. All those, I'm sorry, roll call.
Senator Bouchard, and he thought he'd be back by now, but obviously he's not, so.
He's excused.
Okay. Senator French,
Aye.
Senator Cost,
Aye.
Senator Wasserberger,
Aye.
Chairman Boner,
Aye.
4 ayes, 1 excused. Do pass as amended.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's time that the state of Wyoming makes a larger investment.
Yeah. Well, everybody else seems. All right.